this? Well, loads to discuss, including the problems that Keir Starmer is having. A YouGov poll saying by 50% to 24%, Britons think Sir Keir Starmer should step down as Prime Minister. 2024 Labour voters are split. 37% want him to stand down, 40% want him to stay. Let's speak to the king of polls, Joe Twyman, founder of Delta Poll. Good to have you in the studio. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Will Keir Starmer look at this and act on it, do you think, or is this just more noise about Keir Starmer? Because obviously people are responding very, very clearly to the Mandelson allegations, but is that the thing that's going to top him, do you think?
Well, it's obviously not a good news story, and I think everyone can agree that. But when I see polls about, X% of people say that the Prime Minister should resign, my question is always, well, what was the figure last week?
Okay.
And what was the figure
last week?
And the answer is probably pretty similar.
Right.
I don't think the precise question was run, but generally speaking, there's a lot of discontent about Keir Starmer at the moment. The key question is whether this latest event is a turning point in his fortunes or just a talking point. Will this add to the cumulative pressure upon him, or will it just eventually die out in the noise? The short answer is we don't know, because we don't know how things are going. But it won't be about the poll results today or tomorrow. It'll be about the poll results in weeks and months that determine the impact of this specific event. And I think anyway, vanishingly few people come the general election are going to say, I'm not voting Labour specifically because of Peter Mandelson.
But it's important now, but as you correctly say, in 3 years' time it may not be. But there is this cumulative effect, this emotional reaction that people have. They may not remember all the detail of every single scandal, but when you have someone who says, I'm Mr. Rules, I'm Mr. Protocol, I'm Mr. Detail, and none of those things appear to have been actually followed properly with the Mandelson scandal, that damages him. It damages his brand to a greater extent, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the cumulative effect that is where the real damage will come from. It's the fact that there will be a continuing narrative. This is an example of the kind of stories that we tell ourselves and each other. That you're right, it's not about the specific detail, but answers questions about, can this person be trusted? Do they know what they're doing? Do they work in an efficient and effective way? Do they tell the truth? All those questions have been answered, not just by this event, however, but by a series of events. And that is the problem that Keir Starmer has. And that's why his, to my mind, position is so weak at the moment. Not because of this specific position, but because of everything that has gone before it, and then having this position and news story come out.
It's interesting, we have obviously some people who others are talking about as potential leaders, Angela Rayner, Andy Burnham, although he's not in Parliament, Wes Streeting and Ed Miliband. I wonder, would Labour do better under them?
Well, we can speculate about what might happen, but it is just that, speculation. Generally speaking, if you look at historical changes of leaders, you see that you can expect a 2 or 3 point bump, but it doesn't tend to last that long. And the key question that all of those candidates would face is, yes, they would come with a clean slate, and it's not that one is particularly popular or unpopular, it's that basically all of them are relatively unknown by the general public. So they'd be coming with a clean slate, but what would be open to them in terms of the levers of power? What could they do fundamentally differently in terms of actually addressing the real issues that people vote on, such as, and most importantly, the cost of living, but also education, the economy, immigration, taxation, all of these things? What could a new leader do that was dramatically different? I think their options are relatively limited.
Stuart has been in touch, and actually there was a call just before the news there, and he was saying that actually within all of this, a lot of the MPs won't get rid of him because they'll see what a general election would bring. Obviously, we don't know whether Keir Starmer would, in the final flourish, simply call the general election. I don't think that's actually likely. But it is interesting if you're a Labour MP sitting there thinking, what's best for me in all of this? Because so many, there hasn't been a single ministerial resignation over this. It would take a couple of members of the cabinet probably to topple Keir Starmer, if not more. So how closely do you think MPs will be looking at all the factors, including the numbers on all of this?
I think what will be really important for all of those MPs that you mentioned is not specifically the polls or the polls about a specific event, or indeed the long-term trends in the polls, which are more important. It'll be the May local elections. I think that will be the point where there will be no hiding left, and people will be looking at areas that they are MPs in, or areas like the areas that they hold constituencies for, and they'll be thinking, what does that mean for the general election in a few years' time? And they'll be thinking, OK, the situation's obviously bad at the moment. Can it recover? Will I survive? And I think that will be an individual basis, the kind of questions that they'll be asking themselves.
Let's talk a little bit about Gorton and Denton. Obviously, we're not going to mention any particular candidate, because then I'll have to read out all the candidates. And if that happens, Joe, you will be taken from the place from whence you came, and your head will be removed from your body. But what's it looking like in Gorton and Denton? What's your instinct?
Well, the short answer is we don't know, because there's been
pretty close in some of the polling between Labour and Reform.
But there hasn't been much in the way of effective polling. There's been a poll with a few more than 100 respondents taking part, and you have to really question the validity of that finding.
The polling company themselves questioned the validity of it, didn't they?
Yes,
They sort of
exactly.
said, this is not a representative sample.
Exactly. When the people trying to sell you the poll are saying,
actually,
don't pay much attention to this, that is what we describe as a red flag. So there's an absence of actual polling, but you get a sense, well, if you look at how it performed last time around, and it's only had one general election because it's a new constituency, which just makes things even more complicated, you see that Labour were way ahead, won more than 50% of the vote, and then Reform and Greens were pretty much neck and neck in second place. So could either of them take it next time? Well, it's not really demographically orientated towards either of those. And so it could be the case that the quote-unquote left vote is split between two parties, Labour and Greens, and that might let Reform in. Alternatively, there may be a galvanisation from specific communities against Reform around a particular candidate, either Labour or Green, that keeps Reform out. But all we really know is that essentially it could be any of the three, and anything more than that is just speculation.
What about the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats? I mean, it's unlikely they'll do particularly well in that constituency.
There are, of course, a large number of other candidates running,
yes,
and
we're not going to talk about.
You can go onto various websites and find the full list. But I think, judging by the evidence we have available, and as I say, there's not a lot of that, but judging by the evidence we have available, it appears that it's going to be a three-way race. It may be a two-way race. It may be a one-horse race. Not that I'm suggesting that any of the candidates are horses.
Well, that's very good that is the case. I just wonder, more broadly, and not specifically related to Gorton and Denton, the polling doesn't seem to have gone just quite as well for Reform UK recently. There seems to be more of a move downwards for them, maybe a bit more for the Conservatives. Just give us your general overview of how things are going. If
you look at things over the last couple of months, what you've seen is that Reform have, on aggregate, dropped back a bit. The Conservatives have improved their position slightly. They're now essentially a little bit ahead of Labour, but still both are some distance behind Reform, even though they have dropped back a bit. And the Greens have been doing better, but they still haven't managed to get that real breakthrough into a sort of firm second place for them. So yes, there's movements, but it's not an enormous amount of movement. And there have been discussions about whether Labour has essentially reached rock bottom, whether they will go any further. And what will be interesting, going right back to the question about the Mandelson story, the big question around that is, will that mean that Labour do see a decline, a further decline, whereas up until now, certainly for the last few months, they've been pretty much plateauing. You would expect presumably more polling this weekend, perhaps? Yes, fairly soon. Yeah, there'll be lots of polls about this weekend. But as I say, over the next weeks and months, that will be the really interesting stuff to see impact it has had. Joe, thank you very much, as always. That is Joe Twyman there, the founder of Delta Poll, King of Polls, in the studio. Thank you very much indeed.